Hey, everybody. Welcome back. This week, I would like to talk about advanced Ironman race paces. So, this is meant for folks that have been involved in the sport for several seasons and are at the tippy toppy end of the field. So, if this is you, you probably know most of this. If you're on your way to this point, this will probably be good for you to listen to and either rehash some ideas you've already seen somewhere or get some new information. So, for athletes of this caliber, we're now talking about folks that are training quite a bit. They're dialing in their zones, they understand their nutrition. And most likely, if you are at this point or on your way to this point, you really should have done some metabolic testing so that you have an understanding of how you're burning energy, uh, as well as sweat rate testing, so you know how much electrolyte you need throughout the day, so that you're really not guessing anymore. You've got these numbers dialed in, and you know that if you exceed, let's say, 80% of threshold power on the bike for 5 minutes, it's going to throw off your glycogen burn rate. So these are things that you're going to have drilled into you, and you're not messing about. So for the race itself, that's all the training and preparation. For the race itself, for the swim, at this point, you need to be a good enough swimmer that you don't lose 20 minutes on the swim. You can make up 10, you can make up 15 with really strong running and biking, but when you get into that 20-minute plus, where if you're shooting for a top five and they're swimming an hour 5 in your age group, and you're at hour 20, hour 25, hour 30, you're too far back. It's just, you would have to be a former professional cyclist really to make that kind of ground up. So your preparation for your swim obviously needed to be high volume or some form that got you through that I'm gapped space, and now you're only 10 minutes behind, if not at the front. You could be the first swimmer. That's terrific. But the goal is not to lose more than 10 or 15 minutes off the lead group of swimmers in your competition, grade. So how do you do that? One, you need to hang on to the pack as well as possible. The whole thing about swimming on your own and swimming a clean line, I don't recommend that. At this point, you need to be holding on to people's feet. And if you are jumping feet to move yourself through the field, that's what you do, because that's a competitive advantage. We are looking for every edge that we can get. And if you are giving away time to swim a little more comfortably, then you need to spend more time practicing being uncomfortable in the swim. So goal, as far as effort, it shouldn't be harder than a 4 or a 5 out of 10, on the effort, PE effort level. And really your heart rate shouldn't get higher than zone 2, for maybe a small piece where you have to bridge a gap where you get up to zone 3 for 20 seconds or something. But we're talking like you are doing a very consistent, strong, but steady effort, right? And the whole zone 2 thing is going to hold true for the entirety of the race, with the exception of cardiac drift and, fatigue, heat from sun exposure and all that, where your heart rate may drift out of the theoretical zone that you're in, but your effort level is still correct. Transitions, if I got to tell you to hurry up in transitions at this point, then you belong in a different sport. You should be minimizing your time in transition unless you have to take a potty break. That's the only reason. And if that's the case, don't say you heard it from me, but maybe you should just go potty right by your bike, although you usually have a transition tent and all that. So, make up your own mind about that, but hopefully you're not having issues there. You really should be like under 5 minutes on the transitions. And then the bike. So again, you really should know your exact functional threshold power. You should have a very good idea of your heart rate zones. And going by time, if you are, now in the 9-hour finisher, maybe you're up to 76, 77% of functional threshold power as your average. If you're, 430 kind of biker, maybe you're a tiny bit higher than that. There's a chart that I link below, which is very useful to have an idea of what your score is relative to the time and the effort that you're putting into it. Because if you bike a 4.5 hours, but you did it at 87% of FTP, you might have 10 miles of good running, and then you're probably going to walk the rest. So it's always going to be better from a total race management standpoint to give up a few minutes on the bike so that we can run through the last 10K, because so many of these races come down to who holds it together for the last 7 or 8 miles. Now, at the tippy end of this race, most people are holding it together because your competitors are well trained and they have practiced. They have done long days. They have rehearsed nutrition. There's no screwing about. They're not guessing anymore. They're scientists on the bike here. So if you're like a 10-hour, 10:30 kind of athlete, that's going to be more in the 55, 59 age group at this point in time. Maybe you're closer to 72%, 73%, maybe 74% of FTP as an average again. And heart rate, you really shouldn't be getting out of zone 2 at any point. If you're the type of athlete that loves to hammer the climbs, you need to retrain yourself so that you're not doing that. We want to keep our heart rate as low as possible, which is why we train so much, so that we are burning more fat throughout this entire race, right? So fat utilization is high, meaning carbohydrate burn is low. Muscle glycogen is being conserved for later in the race. And then, we're taking in as many calories as we can. When you get to 11, 12, 13 hours, again, this is going to be 70, 74, 75, 79. Your FTP average needs to be a little lower because of the length of time that you're going to be out there. So maybe you're now 70%, 69%, 68%. So, take a look at this chart. You could do a little extra reading about what goes on there, but the longer the day is for you, the lower effort level you need to be to maintain pace throughout the day. Now, a note about calories. Biking is where you're going to have the chance to get the most calories. And you, again, tippy end of the spear here, you have probably seen that some of the professionals are really jamming in the calories. They're taking in a high amount of carbohydrate. And that's not a bad thing, right? They are training themselves to take as much as possible. And I would recommend to you that you also need to train to take in as much as you can without getting sick, right? Without like causing problems for yourself, without having stomach distress, gastric distress, GI issues, any of that. So you need to find the upper limit of what you can tolerate. You need to find a good mix of food type that works for you, whatever supplement it may be. There's a ton of them out there. I personally like adding simple maltodextrin to my sports drink, which for me, I prefer Gatorade Endurance, but you pick your own. And you can get a lot of calories in one bottle, and then you can practice taking it in on your 7-hour rides. All right. So the last two things about the bike. You really want your variability index, or how much it spikes and drops, your power output or your effort output, to be very smooth. Again, I know some folks that like to climb hard and then recover on the downhills, but in practice, that's probably not the best way to race the bike. So if you look into the VI index, or VI, variability index isn't a word. It should be up under like a 1.05 and ideally closer to 1.02 or 1.03, meaning there's only a 3% variance, right, in what you're doing. And that's normal. If you're climbing a little, it's okay to go a tiny bit harder. And if you're recovering downhill, it's okay to be a tiny bit easier. You're going to soft pedal when you get a new drink. You're going to maybe soft pedal when you're drinking or eating. So there are going to be some variations there. And the one last thing about the bike is cadence. So if you've never heard this before, again, for you folks that are coming to this point, maybe you're not at this point yet. Generally speaking, you want a high cadence on the bike, which is using your slow twitch muscle system, meaning we're using our aerobic system. When you go to a lower cadence, you tend to push harder on the bike, which is actually our anaerobic system, or more of our anaerobic system. And the anaerobic system burns more muscle glycogen. So you will burn more energy if you ride with a low cadence. And so for that reason, you want to ride with a higher cadence. Ideally over 80, if you can get it up to a comfortable 84, 86, 88, that's great. So that's something to work on because I know that's not easy for a lot of us. And onto the run. Now, the run, you should have a very good idea of what sort of pace you should be able to hold on this. On average, at again, the faster end of the racing field here, folks can run within 15 to 20 minutes of their best marathon time. So if you're a 240 marathoner, you could probably get into a 255 3-hour Ironman run. It's going to spread out a little bit, as we get older. If you're, 74-year-olds and your time now is a 3:30, which is freaking awesome. Maybe you're going to run a 3:55 or 4 hours in the race, again, which is also pretty awesome. And then as far as a percentage of your threshold, your run threshold, it shouldn't be faster than like 80 or more than 85, 87%. And heart rate wise, we're also looking to keep it relatively low. So maybe up to 90-ish% on percentage of threshold heart rate, right? So if your threshold heart rate is 170, you're trying to keep your heart rate under like 153, right? And that's going to put you mostly into the probably top of zone 2. As we go in the marathon, you will have some cardiac drift. You're going to have fatigue. Heart rate is probably going to climb. What I've seen with a lot of my athletes is that it climbs in the beginning, and then as they just get too tired and the pace slows, it drops, right? So our goal is to not let it climb too high in the beginning so that we can maintain pace throughout the race. Everybody's going to have different reactions with their heart rate relative to effort and the conditions. So you need to have rehearsed a bunch and have an idea of what's going to go on with your system after 8, 9, 10 hours of racing, right? If you stay on top of your nutrition and sodium and electrolytes, you will have a much better time than if you don't. So that's a given. Again, at this stage of the game, you need to have that all dialed in. You need to know what you're taking, when you're taking it. You are not forgetful. We're not skipping a water station because somebody was in your way. Because again, you know that if you lose 4 seconds or 10 seconds at your water stations so that we can run the final 10K, it makes all the world a difference. I'm sure some of you have been in races where you were with a competitor and then with 3 miles to go, they just blow up. And you're like, I wonder what happened to him. Well, something went wrong, and it's likely related to nutrition and electrolytes at that point. Some people are just going to pop because of the heat. That's a different story. Now, things you're going to deal with at this level of athletics, you're going to have some egos. So you're going to have to deal with like those hard stares at the meetings where they're just like, I know who you are and I've got your number, man. You might have to deal with comments. There's going to be very rare cases of intentional sabotage where you show up and your bike is missing its water bottle or there's a flat tire. I'm not saying this happens a lot, but these are things that have happened in history. So you got to be a little more careful with, watching your stuff. And then the biggest one, well, the biggest two that I see these days is number one, drafting, whether it's intentional or not. The number of athletes in these races, when you have 2,800 athletes on a field or in the race course, it becomes very, very difficult, if not impossible, to truly police that. And I'm sure every one of you knows people out there that will love to sit in the pack or sit off people's wheel as much as possible so that they can get to the run and be relatively fresh. And as again, front of the pack racer, you're going to have to deal with that. You're going to have to make your decisions on how you want to cope. I always just held my own pace and did my thing. And if people wanted to cheat, that was on them, not on me. So, I would teach you to be the best athlete you can be and use other people as you go around them. Yes, it's legal to break into the zone and then come around, but I don't advocate sitting on a wheel for 100 miles out of a 112-mile bike race because that's not fair to everybody else. And the last thing is, the last 15, 20 years have seen an explosion of testosterone therapy in various populations. And we're talking about maybe 10 to 15% of the US male population now has either used testosterone or is currently using testosterone, depending on what articles you read. And invariably, some of these folks are going to wind up in your racing fields. Now, having a doctor's prescription does not give you a therapeutic use exemption. There's a big difference because really only about 1 in 200 men actually is clinically diagnosed with the need for testosterone. Everybody else is using it for anti-aging or because it helps them feel better, whatever reasons. So again, at the pointy end of the spear here, there are going to be folks that have chemical help, and it's not fair and it's not right. And so you're going to have to deal with that as well. So for those of you watching that are using testosterone and didn't realize it's not legal because it's a performance enhancing drug, this is your notice. You're not supposed to take that if you want to race in world championship events or qualifying events. And this is a problem that is U.S. Masters of Swimming is seeing, cycling is seeing, triathlon, running, every endurance sport is seeing this problem. Bodybuilding's always had an issue with performance enhancing stuff. So, now we're just seeing a different venue for it. So you have to focus on you. You have to focus on being the best that you can be with doing the way you want to do things. I'm not advocating for drafting or testosterone therapy. I am saying you need to be aware that there are people out there that are going to do that, and you just have to deal with it, right? So this has been about advanced Ironman racing. This is talking about 140.6, the long versions. I linked a bunch of stuff down here if you want to read further. Thank you for watching, and like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.